next up, I'm very pleased to introduce Neal Sherman. He's the CEO of TAGeX Brands. And Neal brings a very interesting perspective of the industry. Obviously, as an equipment broker, very good perspective on the openings and closings of the industry. And I've come to become close with Neal. Very good insights in the industry, and have joked that obviously he's somewhat of a mortician as well, as we kind of think about the industry and the overcapacity.
I'm proud of that, by the way.
It's sincere, by the way. So I wanted Neal just to kind of kick off with a few slides just on his role at TAGeX and his view of the industry, and then I'll kick it back for questions.
Sure. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I want to thank Andrew for this opportunity. I don't wear a suit usually, so you're giving me more ROI than the usual weddings and funerals along the way. So I'm with TAGeX. We're based in Rochester, New York. We're a national company. We've been around for 31 years. This is our 31st year in business. And yes, he did say we take a view of helping people close locations. It's been referred to as many things, some of which I won't share in mixed company. And one is the Dr. Kevorkian of the restaurant industry. My business partner hates when I say that. But we do have an interesting perspective on what's going on in the underbelly of the restaurant world. And he asked me to focus today on overcapacity. So I just hit that. So a couple of points here that I'll dig deeper into. One is oversupply in the restaurant industry. The second is the impact of oversupply. Some chaos indicators, something that Andrew and I talk often about, and then what winners do. It's interesting that Andrew asked me to speak here because I don't usually get asked to speak at conferences where smart people like you all that are investors or analysts are, because no one wants to talk about the other side of growth. Everybody can paint a great story. It's all wonderful, hunky-dory. But for those of you, I know nobody here, but some people make bad investments in the restaurant industry. But it'll give you some insight as to what we see in the marketplace. So the question of market saturation. So if you have to ask the question, are there too many restaurants or places to eat in the world, then you're not the sharpest crayon in the box. Because the answer is, of course there are. There's obscene numbers of restaurants, food outlets, food trucks, delivery, supermarkets, everything else that's in the marketplace. So that first question, Andrew, is yes, there's too many. And I'm a big eater, so I can absorb a lot of supply. But so I use the example of Ovid, New York. Does anybody here know where Ovid, New York is? Anybody? Anybody know where the Finger Lakes are, right? So our facility is in the Finger Lakes. It's an old Army base. That's 1,000 acres, 2.5 million square feet, out of which we operate, and we bring surplus equipment in from all over the country. We remanufacture it and ship it back out, either in somebody's own operation or we sell it in the aftermarket. We have half a dozen locations around the country. Now, the reason I put up Ovid, New York is population 620 is this is a microcosm of the oversupply of restaurant and food options in America. That is a real live Amish guy, right, on the left in Ovid, New York. That is Ovid, New York, right in the center there. You can see there's not a lot of activities. But the other day we counted 14 restaurant options in Ovid, New York, okay? McDonald's, Dairy Queen, Domino's, all these other locations in Ovid, New York. So if you want an example of the microcosm of what Ovid represents in the US, you can only imagine what this is like in larger metropolitan areas. So what are some of the reasons for all this overcapacity that we see in the marketplace, because we get brought in when there's problems? So one thing we see is sector blur. On the left is our hometown favorite Wegmans supermarket. For those of you that have been at a Wegmans, it is virtually a restaurant. It's foods to go, it's prepared foods. Huge percentage of their business is prepared foods. That's a Sheetz location, also competitive to the restaurant space. And that's I used to say pret-a-manger, but my wife said it's pret-a-manger, right? Is that right? Is that it? And then I said it was au bon pain until we got asked to close about a dozen of them last month. And then I had to pronounce it properly to get the business. So the other thing that's causing this oversupply that we see is the preference for the independent. Chains, my perspective, are going away. There's fewer chains that are opening up. This slide on the far right from Bloomberg is just a small example of it. The yellow are independents that are opening. Can you give me one of those waters?
Yeah.
Are the independents that are opening in 2016, 2017. The percentages are even greater. So the quality independent is eating the lunch of the chain restaurant in mainstream America. Why? Because there's just better operators locally. It's the Cheers effect, right? I'm affiliated with the CIA, the Culinary Institute of America. Restaurant operators, chefs who work in places like New York, Chicago, LA, they can't afford to open restaurants in those locations, so they move back to places like Rochester and Richmond and Des Moines, and they open them up. There's no need to go to an Applebee's or an Olive Garden when a quality independent knows your name when you show up, he knows what drink you want at the bar and everything else. So that's a huge factor that people really don't think about when they think what's affecting this oversupply in the marketplace. So they love the local guy. The delivery phenomenon is overstated. Those of you that make investments in those, best of luck in that, because every restaurant is adding it as an app or as a service to their existing operation. Not just restaurants, but also supermarkets, convenience stores. They're all adding delivery to the equation. And then the meal kits. I just don't get this, right? Eventually, all the prepared foods people, because we're on the front end helping them source equipment to their locations, and on the back end getting rid of equipment that doesn't work. There was a concept in New York that came in with great fanfare. Maple, you familiar with that? Big fanfare, big money. At the same time that there was a conference called the Restaurant Leadership Conference, a conference Andrew and I attend and present at, one of the industry specialists was saying how maple was the hottest thing in the US as we were negotiating to close all their commissaries. So this is the disconnect between reality and what is being presented in the marketplace. So one other question people ask us, we do a fair amount of work in the world of retail. We're supportive of big companies like Gordon Brothers and Hilco and Schottenstein that close retail locations and manage the inventory out. We deal with the physical plant, the infrastructure, and monetize that. So this is an example of the retail world and what's happened in the retail bankruptcies. And the impact on restaurants that we see is direct. Less retail, fewer shoppers, empty malls, fewer diners, closed restaurants. So in the fact that we deal with closing restaurants and liquidating the equipment in locations, this is a trend that continues. Last night, one of the experts talked about 35% of malls going away in the coming years. For those of us that help restaurants close, that's an okay trend for us. But the empty and closing restaurants is real. Any out parcel that exists is just toast if the anchor or the primary pieces are there. So to give you order of magnitude, one part of our business is the facility closures. So we manage all the aspects of that for restaurants, for banks, for real estate companies, depending on who's left with it. In the last 18 months, we have physically closed, I think it's up to about 1,400 locations now. 1,400 restaurants, almost 1,000 Ruby Tuesdays, 36 Logan's Roadhouses just about the time of their bankruptcy, Bob Evans, everything else. And it doesn't discriminate the factor of closure. It is across all categories, fine dining, fast food, fast casual. The fast casual piece, everybody wanted to be the Chipotle of whatever, right? So they wanted to be the Chipotle of Chinese food, the Chipotle of pizza. So a big, the better burger concepts, we're closing those. We're closing the higher end pizza locations. There's only so many. This notion of closure of restaurants doesn't discriminate in the marketplace. The other thing is, with the whole food network phenomenon, many of these restaurants are in New York. I married a New Yorker who thought society ended at the Hudson River, that famous New Yorker sketch. But all these big chefs who raise money, because everybody wants to be in the restaurant business, have closed locations. We've been involved in a handful of these. but it was thought that if you brand it with somebody who's a marquee player in the Food Network, that they would be in a position to add a cachet and take it across America. The answer is no, okay? And then when my guys were putting together this presentation, when you asked me to talk about the underbelly, they found a restaurant in Houston actually called the Underbelly. And so I said, find out about this guy, because I love barbecue. So he was a James Beard guy. I said, let's see if we can find out about this guy. Well, he closed last month. So the Underbelly guy actually closed, so we had no example of Underbelly actually surviving. So he was a James Beard Award winner that closed as well. So what to look for? So Andrew said, well, can you kind of share what you see as a precursor, as a predictive indicator, when chaos is to ensue? So the lack of discipline management, I mean, I'm stating the obvious here, but the lack of discipline management, people who have reckless disregard for basic financial and operational disciplines, if that's lacking, that's a good indicator that we may be showing up soon. True growth, I call this the shell game of growth. And public companies who have to disclose it are really good at that. They always talk about, okay, we're expanding locations or we haven't closed locations. Well, I call it the shell game because it's the buyback of franchisees that fail to protect their unit counts, or it's transitioning and supporting other franchisees that are larger and stronger by giving them sweetheart deals as it relates to the troubled or distressed franchisees so that their overall unit count number doesn't have to change. And that's evident in just about every public company, I would say, that we've come across. And then the real impact of innovation, no disrespect to the prior speaker, but it's in the industry. I love Sonic, and some of their things are really innovative. There's a lot of people that talk about innovation that it doesn't really have a substantive sales impact. And then the other piece would be the recommendation to view the sector broadly. You're just not tracking the restaurant sector, you're tracking the consumable food sector. And if people like Wegmans, my hometown chain, who we've worked for many years, they operate better with a higher quality than most every restaurant in America. Sheetz, Wawa, some of these other very progressive C-store chains. It used to be, when I was a kid, you went to a supermarket for groceries, you went to a gas station for gas, and your family went out to a restaurant. And now you can get prepared foods at a Wawa. It's kind of a freaky concept. So those are predictive indicators. And then what do winners do? They don't focus in on location growth for location growth's sake. They prune weakness, right? They take their medicine. My lawyer always talks about how you have to take your medicine and close the bad operators, right? The bad locations. And really good operators realize that they have to close locations that don't operate well. And then my personal bias is the reuse of equipment assets. Everybody always wants new equipment. Obviously, I'm biased. We've been doing this for a long time. Is the reuse of the fixed assets of the location are a hidden opportunity for those of you that advise or input, give your input to other people. The closed locations, we extract the physical plant and redeploy it. It's also good for the environment. Wasn't intended, but that's the way it is. Operational exit, and then hidden value. I've been doing this for 31 years. I have never been in a restaurant, convenience store, supermarket, or any other food service operation where I haven't seen assets that are idle. And you ask, what are they doing there? What is this new equipment in the location? Well, we just put it there and we just deal with it. So the good operators realize that there's hidden value in dormant assets, in warehouses, in back rooms, in closed locations. So that's an overview.
You know, just to follow up on that, as you think about the causality behind some of these closures, you kind of touched on the presentation, but you know, consumers are obviously using delivery services at a more rapid clip. I mean, the work we've done suggests about 80% incrementality, but look, everybody's jumping into it. The incrementality is obviously going to go down over time. And so could you argue that this creates less of a need for seating with the rise of delivery services, and this could exceed acceleration in closures as a result?
So the delivery thing, I'm not 100% clear on. I have a nephew who is an engineer. He's got his master's. He worked for a big construction company. He got hired by one of these delivery companies to strategize the delivery protocol in metropolitan areas. And my question to him was, what happens when you leave New York, Chicago, LA, even Atlanta, does the delivery numbers transcend if you extrapolate the numbers going forward? I don't know that answer. I do think that delivery will reduce the demand for seats.
Yep.
I do think that the cultural shift of younger people, they are not as engaged in, and I won't speculate on the psychographic trends of millennials, because I have two of them that I'm the father of, and I don't understand them. But I would say that there's less need. So I think, that'll continue.
Okay. We talked a minute ago about the hot up and coming concepts, what to keep an eye on. I mean, how do you think about, it seems like 5-7 years ago, Better Burger was obviously kind of, I don't want to say bubble, but certainly something that was obviously growing very quickly, proliferation of concepts. Does pizza kind of feel like it's fitting the mold right now, that just the proliferation who are coming in? Do you see similarities there, and are you seeing closure activity as well out of these?
Yeah. So I always love the hot concept articles, because they're a precursor to us 5 years out, right? So it's amazing the winners. Like I told the Maple story, it was just immediate in front of me what an absurd thing it was. So I think the Better Burger concepts. I mean, look, Chipotle is not what it once was. It's not the unstoppable Chipotle. They've had a lot of issues. I think the Better Burger concepts are, what do they stand for? I mean, if McDonald's bleeds over and gets a fresh burger, some of the people that are on the fence of going to the better, you need enough critical mass. I think the pizza industry is another one that's there. The independents also. I mean, how do you compete against, quality independents on the pizza side?
Yep.
It's really tough. So.
For sure. I know you're not an accountant by background, but are there factors that investors can monitor with companies' capital expenditures or inventory that could suggest a concept could be gearing up to slow development?
Yeah, I mean, the CapEx thing to me is often the neglected dimension of it. How much companies spend on equipment either for existing locations to introduce new product extensions, and the hype affiliated with product extensions. It's interesting, I was talking to some McDonald's franchisees, and because of the addition of fresh meat, their entire equipment system changes. And so Tim Hortons, which was always the wonderful Canadian company until they tried to come to America, right? They changed the entirety of their system from a scratch-made donut like 10 years ago to a par-made donut, which was, blasphemy in Canada that they would do that. But they did it because they couldn't rely on the employees and everything else. So I think if you had watched Tim Hortons, they weren't public, it was before that they were acquired, and seen their capital expenditures on new equipment and everything else, it would say, well, what is the basis of that? A lot of other companies buy long on the capital equipment because they think they're going to grow locations, and then they call us.
What are the inputs that you kind of look at? Any data sources or metrics that you follow to aid you most in your job?
So we get alerts from all the Google and other market-related alerts about closures. And every time locations have to close, each state has their own. You have to register with the Department of Labor of a given state that you're going to close if it's a certain size of location. Bankruptcy filings are always an indicator that things aren't going too well, whether it be Chapter 11 or Chapter 7. The other thing is the banks that have lent against, right, this is what we talked about in Las Vegas at the other conference. It's amazing to me how smart bankers and lawyers think they are, and I'm married to a recovering lawyer, so that when they lend against the assets of a location, that they don't tie that to the leases that borrower negotiates. So when we go into a location and the lender says that they have a lien on the assets that are in the location, and we show up and the landlord goes, no, look at the lease, everything there is, ours. That would be a thing that I would clean up immediately in every chain in America, is to make sure that there's, if they're financed, in multiple buckets between CapEx and everything else. So,
very good. Neal, just touching on one of the questions I was asked earlier. You mentioned about 1,400 plus or so closures over the last 18 months. Knowing what you know today, I mean, if you had to think about the next 12 to 18 months, how many closures would you say are coming down the pike?
So those are only locations that we physically manage the closure of. So we developed our own app. So like Sonic talked about their app. We developed an app where we send it to our clients when they've closed locations or they have surplus. We have an app that goes out there and we actually sell it from the locations on one of our online platforms. We have 6 channels that we sell. So that has gone up significantly in terms of the number of people that we're liquidating surplus for. I would say that it's going to increase. You talked about things on the bubble that operators continue to operate. I think that'll eventually, in certain sectors, people will get fed up with it, or they'll put a Verizon store in there or something else. And I think it'll be more. I think it's more, right? So we've been doing this a long time. I've not seen this amount of demand. We had 500,000 people on our online auction platform looking at or buying surplus equipment last month.
Gotcha.
So,
Neal, you got a question as well?
So where do you think it's all going? Like, is it going to be run by the consolidation plays, or is it the independents who are really well managed? Or is there another?
yeah, where's what going? Is the closure process?
Then ones who are not closing, the ones that might survive, and as everything shakes out.
Yeah, I think they have to realize that all these things that come out, that dedicated concepts, either the delivery or the app or whatever, they have to do it themselves because of reliability on those other things. I think Amazon is an 800-pound gorilla to everybody in every sector, including us. We have an Amazon store. Who thought that anybody would buy used restaurant equipment on Amazon? So I was the guy who said no one would ever buy it on eBay, and we were the largest seller in the early 2000s. So I think that the view has to be that food is just not in its traditional subsector. It's not traditionally restaurants, convenience stores, supermarkets, everything else. That the smart play is to realize who's catering to the food needs of everybody across multiple experiences, whether it's to go, whether it's delivery, whether it's in location. People like Wegmans, I mean, obviously I'm biased, right? But Wegmans they have all this stuff. They have delivery, they have pickup, they have boxes, you can make dinner. They'll send a chef to your house. I mean, if the good operators will survive. Good operators will always survive. I don't know who the good operators are. In the quick service category, they're so pressured by price, I don't know. Fast casual is just a nice way of saying, okay, we got a new investment vehicle. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Two unrelated questions. The first is, given the upward move in rents in a lot of urban areas, why has there not been more pushback on these food trucks, which I guess pay something, but a fraction of what rents are in urban markets like New York? Why has there not been a more concerted effort against them? I guess would be the first question. And my second question is just one of curiosity is, are there certifications once something is rebuilt before it enters a restaurant? Does it have to be certified by some body, or used equipment is just... You're
not with the government, are you?
No,
okay, good.
Used equipment, just the Wild West, and it is what it is.
Yeah, so the first question about the food trucks is that restaurant operators hate food trucks. In places like Austin, they gathered and said, get this park out of here. And it was cool. I mean, it was a great place, 2 of them that they got rid of. So I think you'll see that more and more by the restaurateurs in different municipalities of the country, and they try to argue the health department element, that they don't have, plugged in water or drainage or whatever along the way. So I think you'll see much more of that there'll be a continued surge for the restaurateurs to be protectionist against the food trucks. Or they can be smart restaurant operators and launch their own food truck, which is less overhead, less rent, and better for their promotional purposes. We've seen a lot of restaurants source equipment from us to deploy their own food truck.
It would seem you're, I guess, at least mildly biased towards encouraging businesses to close until you acquire a good chunk of your inventory.
Just trying to make the world a more efficient place, man. Just trying to make it more efficient.
But at the same time, you have your credibility on the line. You want to be able to say, hey, this makes sense, this doesn't make sense.
Sure.
That's a For the franchise-oriented businesses, which have a slightly different model, what would you say is a healthy closure rate before they should consider a buyback or other things to encourage sales? Or what's the model that you think about, the mathematical inputs to?
Yeah. I don't know that I think about the model. I can tell you about explanation. I mean, I think that they buy them back immediately before they want any of you smart people on Wall Street to know what's going on. I mean, that's digging underneath the covers. You got to find out who's buying them. I think you really have to look at the core economics of the concept. Is the concept have more customers, and are they buying more stuff? And are you a disciplined manager always looking at the bottom line? I mean, my father was a Napa guy. You had to have the disciplined management to run an auto parts store, so the hope is it's the same. So.
Very good. Neal, we're out of time. I know you're here for the rest of the day, though.
Yep.
Really appreciate your insights,
Yep.
and thank you very much.
Anybody else I can help you out with, I have information. Thank you.